My name is Dr. Robert Black. I run you would call it, unusual recovery group. I started PESA, Paranormal Encounter Survivors Anonymous, after a rather harrowing experience of my own. But I won't go into my own experience right now. I decided to start transcribing, with everyone's consent of course, our meetings and posting them in a public forum in order to hopefully understand them better. As time has gone on, however, there have been certain patterns in everyone's stories that I've found disturbing and suggest something far fouler than each story separated from each other. Below is the transcript of the first time John has spoken up at one of the meetings. John is currently a college student at the local community college. More information about him is being withheld in order to protect his identity. Transcript for PESA meeting, January 17th, 2017. Thank you to everyone who is here for a second, third, fourth, or even fifth time showing up. For the newbies here, my name is Dr. Black. I started this little group to try to help other survivors of, well, these types of things. I know, much like a lot of you do by now, that people who are going through the same thing as you can help with the healing process. Does anyone want to start? No one speaks for several seconds. I will, I guess, since no one else seems to want to start. Thank you. Start by introducing yourself. First names only. No problem, Doctor. Hello, everyone. My name is John. Everyone responds with the "Hi, John," before becoming quiet again. I am pretty sure my hand was possessed by a demon. John holds up both of his hands, except he only has one. His right hand ends at the wrist. I'm pretty sure it started when I went to Larissa's party about 2 years ago. Or was it Lauren's? It doesn't matter, I guess. It was the usual college party, lots of underage drinking, a couple people passing a joint around. A good time, you know? So there I was, just enjoying myself as a college student, probably getting a bit too drunk, maybe getting a bit too high. I saw this beautiful girl talking to Lauren. Black hair, blue eyes, an Iron Maiden t-shirt that conformed in just the right places. Seeing as she was the only other person at the party with similar music interests to mine, I decided to start up a friendly conversation. And what did you know? She actually seemed interested in me. Who'd have thought? I don't know if it was the pot or the beer or just my desperate self, but she was really interesting. I can't think of any of the specific details about the conversation we had. I have an idea what she looked like, and I do remember the t-shirt, but a lot of that night is hazy, for obvious reasons you can imagine. Well, you don't have to imagine it, I guess, since I'll just get right to the point. I'm feeling sorry for myself in front of a bunch of strangers. It's okay, John. We are here to listen to each other without judgment. John was quiet for a second before continuing. Thanks, Doctor. Anyway, she wasn't actually interested in me. After about 10 minutes, she was nice enough to grab me a drink from one of the many large coolers floating around the backyard. Turns out, jungle juice wasn't the only thing in that red cup. I'm pretty sure she slipped something in the drink. I blacked out about 5 minutes after. Now that I think about it, though, it wasn't a complete blackout. I do remember some things. Candles. Lit candles. Enough candles to stock an entire Yankee Candle company. Lots of black. Not the blackness of blacking out, but the black of clothing? It was probably clothing. I just remember it being soft and wet. I remember something wet and dark. I woke up the next day in my own bed. I don't remember getting back to my own bed back in the dorms, but I got back somehow. Either I stumbled back or the metal girl got me home, Albert, or any number of people, I guess. I had a huge hangover, as you can imagine, so I didn't notice it at first. Maybe 6 hours? I spent it binge watching old Game of Thrones episodes. Around when Jon Snow was climbing the wall is when I first felt the tingling, like tiny pings of electricity poking at the tips of my fingers. I chalked it up to being hungover. Later that night, though, is when the first weird thing happened. After doing nothing but sitting on the couch and nursing a hangover, I decided to go to bed early. Imagine my surprise when I woke up in the middle of the night to take a piss and I saw this on my nightstand. At this point, John pulled a small pile of folded up papers out of his jacket pocket. He took the top one out and unfolded it. On the first, scrawled in jacket handwriting, was, "Give me what I want." Scared the shit out of me, John continued. As you can imagine, maybe my roommates were playing a prank on me though. I tried to convince myself of that at the time. Come on, spooky notes left for you when you wake up? That's some horror novel schlock right there. The tingling in my hand kept me up for a while, but I did fall back asleep. Another note was waiting for me the next morning when I woke up. John pulled out another note from the pile and showed it to the group. This one said, "Give me what I want," in all capital letters this time. It was the same jagged scrawl, like it was written by something that didn't know how to use the hand. The tingling got worse as the week went on, and the notes didn't stop. John proceeded to open every single note, unfold it, and show it to us before dropping them to the floor. Every single note was identical in the wording, but not in execution. There was a clear evolution of the writing, where it became more legible over time. It became less jagged, more purposeful, more directed, more aggressive. The words were nearly stabbed through the last notes. By the end of the week, my hand felt like it was on fire. I broke down and finally went to the doctor, and when I couldn't stand the pain anymore. They said something about peripheral neuropathy, but that's just a fancy word doctors use when they tell you they don't know what the hell is causing it. I bought some pills from a guy and they didn't help. Alcohol didn't help. Pot didn't help. The pain just kept getting worse and worse. I just couldn't handle it anymore, you know? The pain was messing with my brain, I think. Unless you know that kind of pain, I don't think you would understand. The type of pain that just keeps pulsing no matter what you do. I found the butcher's knife my roommate had in his fancy cutlery and called 911. You think you would hesitate at the prospect of cutting off one of your own limbs? I can't put myself in anyone else's head in the situation. The only thing I knew was that my hand was in so much pain that I couldn't even move it anymore. It looked normal, but it felt like it was on fire. Would you put the fire out if you could? I passed out from blood loss almost immediately. Thankfully, the ambulance gets there pretty fast when you tell them that you just slit your wrist. Probably confused the ambulance guys a bit, but it seemed like they were able to get the job done. I'm still here, aren't I? John chuckled a bit. He reached inside his pocket again and took out one more folded sheet of paper. They put me in a psych hospital. Thankfully, my family has some good connections, and I was able to get out of there after about a month. On my last day there, I found one more note. He unfolded the last sheet of paper and turned it over so everyone could see. The two words were written on it. Thank you. Dr. Black here again. I'll dispense with any explanations and let Elizabeth tell her story. Transcript from PESA meeting, January 31st, 2017. Hello everyone. My name is Elizabeth, Liz for short. I'm a librarian, and I don't know how to start this. I've never actually tried to put what's happened into words before. If I had to put a starting point on this, it would probably be when I met Rain. She started volunteering at the library, sorting the ridiculous number of donated books that we were getting at the time. Unlike most of the other volunteers, she actually stuck around. She started reading stories at the little kiddie book corners we would hold during the summer. And she was really good at it too. She was enthusiastic, entertaining, and you could tell she actually cared if the kids were enjoying themselves or not. I'm not proud of myself for this, but you have imagined it. This gorgeous black-haired beauty that cared about the books and everyone who enjoyed them. I found myself, attracted to her. She was 20 years my junior, and I never actually thought she would reciprocate my feelings. But she did. I noticed one day that she was actually flirting with me. Me, the dense person that I am, just thought that she was nice to everyone. At first, I just chalked it up to her character as being as a human being. The next day, however, she was a bit more explicit. She confessed her own feelings for me. I'm an idiot, and believed her. I suggested a coffee shop where we could talk about ourselves and what we both wanted. She suggested making dinner at her place. We compromised for a fancy-ish restaurant in the nice area of town. She was intoxicating in a way that only people in their 20s can be. We talked about books, a lot of books. She, like me, she was a voracious reader. But it was more than that. She loved the smell of old books, abhorred any excuse people made to not like reading them, and was studying library science at the community college. If it sounds like she was too good to be true, it's because she was. I should have seen it at the beginning. She was just parroting my own loves and hatred back to me and pretending she cared. But you've never met Rain. She had this way of reading people and telling them everything they wanted to hear. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I told you about Rain. I need to tell you about the book. The book came in on a Wednesday, I remember, because it was one of the few days of the week that Rain couldn't make it down to the library because of her school schedule. The book bindings weren't that old. If I had to guess, I would probably say early 20th century. The pages, however, were much older. Right after the Black Plague swept Europe, there was an excess of the type of cloth that usually went to making clothing. Industrious bookmakers took the excess cloth and made book pages out of them. This may seem morbid to make pages out of dead people's clothing, but you know what? It's morbid, but it was cheap for a small portion of time. You can't blame them much, right? This book was made from that cloth. I had seen a couple just like it, but they were rare. Any pages made from untreated organic materials tend to degrade fast, and this stuff was no different. Add on top of that the short amount of time that the cloth was cheap, and you come up with books that were very rare to find. You could understand my excitement when I first found the book. I spent pretty much every day surrounded by books, the majority of them mass-market paperbacks from the past 10 years that are as rare as the pennies at the bottom of your purse. This book, however, was special, something unusual, something truly wonderful. At least that's what I thought at first. If I knew where that book was, I would burn it. I'm sorry. Thinking about it gets me a bit worked up. Knowing how much Rain would love to see this thing, I decided to take it home to examine. Don't look at me like that. If a librarian ever tells you that they'd never taken a book home from the library, without checking it out, then you're talking to a liar. So I took it home, rushed home. I left early, actually. Something I would never do if I wasn't so excited to take a look at the damn thing. The book was in Latin. My Latin was a bit rusty since the last time I tried to read something in Latin was back in college days, but I was able to make out the first few pages. It was a goddamn spell book. Most of that witchcraft stuff was fear-mongering back when then, but there were a few times that the evidence did actually point towards that. It looks like I just found a grimoire. The first page was just a list of ingredients for some sort of preparation ritual. That's about as far as I got before I looked at the clock on my microwave and saw that it was 1 a.m. My Latin wasn't that good, but it shouldn't have taken me 9 hours to read half a page. I chalked it up to the amount of work I had to do today and excitement and hit the hay. Something that should have struck me at the time was the fact that Rain had called it all. She had made a habit of coming over often enough that I gave her a key. Despite what you may think, we hadn't moved in yet, but she was over pretty much every day. You probably heard about this next part. No surprise when 2 people are hung upside down and drained of all their blood in the middle of the goddamn public library. The night guard and the janitor, Bob and Jaquin. Bob was kind of an ass, but Jaquin was nice, if you could understand him through the Brazilian accent. Neither of them deserved what happened. I was at the library long enough to tell the police that I had left early yesterday before going back to my 1-bedroom townhouse. The mystery of the book called to me. Jaquin and Bob had their own family to mourn them. The entire time I was talking to the cops, all I wanted to do was go home and open the book back up. It spoke to me, calling me, commanding me. I didn't even bother to eat anything before opening the book to the page I was on the night before. I remember something about a list of ingredients. Rosemary. Then I look up from the book and there were 3 people in black robes standing in front of me in my living room. It was night outside and the only light entering the room was the moon hanging high and bright in the window. One of the figures looked familiar. Just about the size of a certain young college girl I knew. It's dangerous to read that without some blood. Rain said to me from under the hood. The 2 other robed figures behind her moved forward. They were a lot taller than they seemed at first. Too tall. Were their heads always that close to the ceiling? Things got hazy after that. Next thing I know, I'm sitting on my couch and it's light outside again. The book is gone. In its place is a key. The key to my front door. I never saw Rain again. No one with her name went to the local college. She never even signed up to volunteer at the library officially. She'd just show up one day and, like the idiot I am, never bothered to check if she was legit or not. Who the hell runs a background check on a library volunteer? Maybe I should be glad she took the cursed thing away from me. Given the chance, I probably would have kept reading that thing until I died of starvation or thirst. Whichever came first. I thought I was falling in love. I'm not the only idiot to think that, though. Maybe I would have burned the book eventually. Or maybe it would have burned me. Dr. Black here. Just a quick note for this transcript. Esmeralda has been coming to the meetings for a couple weeks, but has never spoken of her experiences. Esmeralda's father came with her during this meeting. Her father wishes to not have his name given. He doesn't speak much English, so this story is translated by Esmeralda from his Spanish. Esmeralda has continued to come to the meetings, but her father has only attended the one this transcript was taken from. PESA meeting transcript, February 15th, 2017. I come from a long line of curanderos in Mexico. My abuelo was one. My papa was one. I was supposed to be one and was trained from an early to take up the family tradition. I did not, however, enjoy taking money from my neighbors and gullible gringos for herbal remedies and prayers to the saints that didn't work. I actually wanted to help people. Against the wishes of mi abuelo, I studied nursing in Mexico City. The way I made money for school wasn't exactly above board, and it caught up with me eventually. I managed to get asylum back in the days when you didn't have to wait a lifetime to get one. I met Esmeralda's mother when I moved here and made a life for myself and my family. If you need medical help and can't visit the hospital for whatever reason, you've probably already met me. I've stitched up bullet wounds, stab wounds, and helped with the occasional unwanted pregnancy. Recently, something happened that made me question my lack of belief in my family's abilities. A couple months ago, a young man came to me looking for help. He was beaten up badly. I never asked questions but assumed it was the usual. Either some kid trying to defend himself from some... Dad, I can't say that. Yes, I know we're supposed to be honest, but that doesn't mean we have to call people names. Hood rat. We will call them hood rats. Either the kid was defending himself from some hood rat or was the hood rat himself. I never charge or for any services that I give to people, and I don't ask questions. In return, they don't ask where I get the blood for their transfusions. So this kid's mother rushes to our home screaming that he's been cut. Esmeralda can't get anything else out of her and keeps saying that he's been cut. He's been cut. The kid ends up on our kitchen table. I have a better operating theater out in the shed, but the kid looks like he's dipping in and out of consciousness. The kid is bleeding through his Captain America t-shirt in multiple places, so we get him on the table as quickly as we can. Before I can ask for them, Esmeralda has already taken the scissors to the kid's shirt. The kid is bleeding alright, but I can only stare at him as he stains my kitchen table. There were cuts everywhere on his body, down his arms, across his chest and stomach, shallow ones on his neck, and they aren't random. I don't recognize most of them immediately, but I do recognize the biggest one. The cut across his torso formed a pentagram. There are various symbols inside the pentagram that almost look like letters but aren't. Esmeralda told me later that they were Celtic runes. Smaller shapes are carved into the side of the kid. I've seen wounds less than this get hardened gangsters crying for their abuela. This kid should have been screaming or passed out. What I took earlier as this kid going in and out of consciousness was, in fact, him bobbing his head in a rhythmic motion. Forward then back. Forward then back. Like one of those drinking bird toys. His mother had seen the marks on her little boy and was being a good Christian and praying over him. With or without prayers, this kid was going to die without a blood transfusion. Thankfully, I had some O-negative blood still and sent Esmeralda to go grab it from the fridge. While she was grabbing it, I tried to pry any information from the mother. She did not stop reciting her prayers, afraid her little baby boy was going to die with a pentagram carved into his chest. It didn't look like I was going to get any information out of the mother. But she said one thing before Esmeralda came back with the blood.
Túnica negra.
Black robe. She said the black robes did this to him. I put the IV of blood into the boy while Esmeralda took the mother into the living room to try and calm her down. No amount of prayers would save the boy at this point. At least, I didn't think so at the time. The boy kept bobbing his head forward and back while I crushed some antibiotics and mixed it with some water. The head kept bobbing as I attempted to pour them into his mouth, hoping he would swallow them. He gulped the water down for a second, then spilled the rest from his mouth as he bobbed his head back forward. The entire time he stared blankly ahead, seemingly unaware of his surroundings. He was probably dosed with something by these black robes that his mother mentioned. It would also explain how they weren't caught by a random passerby, as these people were carving this kid up like a kebab. At this point, the only thing I could do was attempt to clean and stitch up the wounds. I didn't get a chance to, as when I tried cleaning the pentagram on his torso, his head finally stopped bobbing. His eyes focused for the first time since he arrived at our house and looked directly at me. His eyes focused directly on mine. No fogginess from the drugs I thought he was under, and no pain in his eyes. He screamed. He sat up at the table and tried to grab my head. The scream startled me enough that I moved just enough for his hands to miss my head. He reached again and leaned farther forward. Esmeralda appeared behind the kid and grabbed him, pulling him back on the table. He thrashed and struggled, but thankfully my Esmeralda knows a thing or two about a chokehold. He could no longer reach me, but continued to thrash in Esmeralda's arms. The boy's mother appeared beside him and reached tenderly towards his face. He bit her hand, severing the tip of her finger. As she screamed at her partially severed digit, he spat it out of his mouth and yelled something. It wasn't Spanish or English. He didn't have the chance to tell for long before the chokehold finally had an effect on him and he lost consciousness. I bandaged his mother as best as I could before turning to look at the passed out boy on my dining room table. I tried to rationalize it in my mind, some sickness of the brain, mental scarring from the trauma and drugs his kidnappers had given him, even rabies. But what happened next removed all possible doubt of what this could be. In front of mine, Esmeralda's and his mother's eyes, the wounds grew. The pentagram in the center grew more symbols. The winding patterns around his shoulders extended down his arms and creeped up his neck. With no external effort, the kid's wounds spread with fresh blood and exposed muscle. I remembered something from my childhood. An old woman tied to a bed spewing gibberish at mi abuelo. And he asked for an egg. I told Esmeralda to grab me an egg. To her effort, she didn't hesitate and grabbed one from the fridge. Once I had the egg in my hand, I grabbed jasmine from the spice rack. It wasn't fresh, but it would have to do. I took the dry jasmine and poured the entire dispenser into his mouth. I cupped the egg in my hands and held it next to the kid's open mouth filled with jasmine. I remembered what mi abuelo chanted at the old woman from my childhood, who I had thought was just crazy, and repeated the prayer. I prayed to the Virgin Mary to save this boy. I prayed to Christopher to guide the sickness out of this child and into the egg. A long silence took hold of the room. The only sound, the boy's mother panting behind me as she held her bandaged finger. The boy coughed, spraying jasmine into the air directly above his face. He turned his head to the side, heaving and coughing as he struggled to get the jasmine out of his mouth. The marks on his neck stopped spreading and began to recede into their original cuts, healing along the way, but leaving the blood that had leaked out of them. It was a miracle that the IV hadn't been pulled out of his arm during the scuffle, and he looked at it in disbelief. "Where am I?" he asked in accented English. His mother, having seen what we had seen, still ran to her boy and hugged him tightly. I pulled back to let her, keeping my hands clasped together around the egg. Esmeralda came up beside me and gave me a look of disbelief before looking at my hands. I opened them. The formerly white chicken egg was now black with small red streaks around the shell. It jolted and almost rolled out of my hands, and my surprise, Esmeralda cupped her hands around mine and looked at me. Her look of disbelief probably matched mine, but the kid in front of us was still injured, so I carefully stuck the egg back in the carton Esmeralda had left on the table and stitched the kid up. His name was Roberto. In the commotion before, I hadn't learned his name. I still don't know his mother's full name, but it doesn't really matter, I guess. I stitched the wounds and cleaned them as best I could, and sent them on their way. The egg sat in the carton on the counter. In the time since I had stitched Roberto up, the red streaks on the shell had spread to the other eggs in the carton. I did what I remembered mi umbrello doing, and I found the driest patch of desert I could drive to on a single tank of gas, and I buried the entire carton of eggs. By the time I arrived, the streaks had spread to the entire carton. The egg is still out there, probably corrupting the dry patch of desert I buried it in. But at least out there it can't harm anyone. I don't know who these black robes are, but I hope Roberto never sees them again. And I hope he's doing okay. Dr. Black here again. This next part isn't a transcript from one of the PESA meetings. That's because this is my story. The previous transcripts I've put up here are various stories that I'm pretty sure involved one particular person that I'm going to take responsibility for. Due to complications during my wife's pregnancy, she died while giving birth to my daughter. To say that this shattered me at the time would be an understatement. We had just gotten a new house with a new mortgage, and I was just able to start paying my student loan payments. We were supposed to start the life we had always wanted. We had the house with the white picket fence, and we were on our way to the 2.5 kids. Then she died. My world fell apart at the seams, and I was left with the stack of bills and a crying child that wouldn't let me sleep. I'm not saying that to excuse my behavior. I'm trying to give context to the situation and hopefully give you a better understanding of my actions. I was a terrible father. I spent a lot of time working and pawning off the responsibility of a new child to various family members who could babysit her whenever they could. This is how my daughter Cheryl met my brother William. I love my big brother dearly, but William is not a healthy person. He suffers from paranoid schizophrenia and is obsessed with his visions of the paranormal. He was obsessed with what he called the secrets of the universe, as his visions showed them. At the time, I pitied him and the hallucinations he suffered that made him obsessed. He found something, though. A book. After years of looking for something I was sure never existed, he actually found something. Something that is truly unexplainable. If this sounds familiar, I am sure that the book Elizabeth found in the library was, in fact, the same book. There were days and weeks where I never heard from him. This was unusual, as he constantly called me for various pieces of advice about one thing or another, or to talk about his visions. I advised him as best I could, as a therapist, but always told him that he would need to see someone that wasn't biased to him. He didn't listen, of course, and always used me as a sounding board, so the sudden lack of communication from him was starting to concern me. I found out later that Cheryl was in fact in contact with him around this time. During most of her early high school days, she would go to her grandparents after school until I finished my late residency days. William had been living with my parents since my early days of college because of his condition. His lack of communication should have been a warning sign to me, and I shouldn't have ignored it at the time. Unknown to me, Cheryl had been seeing William and the book. Seeing what the book can do, learning what the book could do. I found the first dead animal when she was a junior in high school. When we came home one night, I noticed the smell of something rancid coming out of her room. When I asked about it, she tried to dodge the question in a way any teenager would dodge that type of question. Not very well. I demanded to know what was in her room. She yelled and screamed about me intruding her privacy. I went in against her wishes and found the eviscerated squirrel pinned to a board on her desk. Every part of the squirrel was pinned in multiple places with what looked like push pins. Drawn on the board were various symbols that were mostly blocked by various squirrel parts. The skin was pulled back and various organs and bones were visible. The thing is, the squirrel was somehow still alive. The stink inside the room, previously blocked mostly by the door, was the smell of roadkill left in the sun for multiple days. I had no idea she was living with the stink of this thing. There were visible organs beneath the pulled back skin, organs that moved, a heart that beat outside of its chest, an arm that moved and attempted to grasp the pin holding it in place. I was flabbergasted by it. At this point, Cheryl went past me and pushed me out of the room, taking advantage of my momentary lack of awareness to remove me from her space. I only noticed what was in the rest of the room for a moment before the door was slammed in my face. Walls, covered in strange symbols and lists of things I couldn't see. No posters of bands or anything you'd expect a teenage girl to have in their room. Apparently, I gave her too good of a lock because I couldn't get the damn thing open. No amount of force or hand jiggling could open it. I gave up. I could tell you that I had just finished a 13-hour day treating schizophrenics in a psych ward. I could tell you that this was the third day of that schedule. I could tell you I didn't know what to do that moment, as I had seen something impossible and was exhausted from everything. A daughter that I barely knew and that I had just found out is capable of something this unfathomable. I went to my room and I fell asleep. I didn't know what to do. She was gone when I woke up the next morning. No sign of the impossible undead squirrel pinned to a board. All of the paper had been taken off the wall during the night. Everything but one. I went to the wall where the only piece of paper still pinned was a letter. Not a very long one. Father, you would not understand what I'm trying to do. It's only fair that I leave in order to do my work, so I don't get in the way of yours. Don't come looking for me. Cheryl. When I searched the room, looking for some sort of clue to where she had gone, is when I found the other animals. Or pieces of them, at least. None of these ones moved, thankfully, other than the animals and some absent clothing in a drawer. There was nothing that would indicate where she went. I went to my parents' place as I couldn't think of anywhere else she could go. One of the things I knew about her was her lack of friends at school, and the only place I knew she went on a regular basis was there. That was where I found my brother, or what was left of him. He wasn't dead, but he was close. It looked like he hadn't eaten in days, and he was jabbering nonsense at no one. My parents were nowhere to be found. I called the paramedics and the cops as soon as I found him. The paramedics told me he was severely dehydrated and had likely not eaten in days. The cops told me there were no signs of forced entry, and it looked like my parents had not been here in days. There were newspapers piled in the driveway and mail extending back 3 days. Missing persons were filed, but my parents were never found. To this day, I have no idea what happened to them. I visited my brother in the hospital when the doctors told me he didn't have much time left. There was already too much damage, they said. When I got there, he was staring into space at nothing. I tried to talk to him, to get any attention or lucidity out of him, but nothing could rouse him from whatever was so interesting on the wall. Until I mentioned Cheryl. When I did, the life snapped back into his eyes and he looked at me. She must never know where the book is. I hid it, and she could never find it. She knows too much already, and it's dangerous. She must not let the unknown one out. She must never know where the book is. She must never know where the book is. He repeated this several times before a nurse came in, wondering where all the noise had been coming from. When the nurse arrived, he suddenly stopped mid-sentence and laid back down on his bed. Why? Was he really that afraid of anyone else knowing about the book? It's not that I don't believe the stories people tell about the paranormal. It's that I've only ever heard and seen one thing that can do the things that people would call paranormal. I'm sure Cheryl and whoever else is with her have the book now. I'm sure that she was Rain. I'm sure that she lured John to take that piece of his body away from him. I'm sure they tried to give that little boy to something. Maybe the unknown one my brother warned of before he died. Maybe not. My past failures as a father have caused these people so much pain and suffering. My failures. I don't know what to do now. I've put the pieces of what's happened to these people together. The only thing I do know is I know at this point that I want to see my daughter again. I want to see her face and her black hair just one more time before she can't come back from wherever she's going. I want to tell her I'm sorry.